they still remember. Neil and Amelia Stafferson enjoyed their quiet and peaceful life in the mountains. They had been living a very lucrative lifestyle and mainly had Neil's hunting to thank. In their neck of the woods, the only things to do were usually to farm, hunt, or fish. Neil was a hunter and one of the best. When he was done hunting for the day, he would round up all the animals he shot and throw them into the back of his truck. Later on, he would sell their pelts. One morning before the break of dawn, Neil and his buddies hunted down a pack of wolves. He took one shot, and all the wolves scattered, all except one, which fell in the snow and didn't move a muscle. Not a single one of Neil's friends was praising him. Neil, on the other hand, was overjoyed. This was the first time he had even shot down and killed a blue wolf, and he had heard they were worth 10 times more than a normal wolf because of their rarity. Neil finally looked back at his friends and finally said, "What the hell's wrong with you?" None of them were happy. As his friends explained, "You're never supposed to kill a blue wolf. It's not only bad luck, but a curse spreads to the person responsible." When a blue wolf was killed, it was said by the townsfolk that its spirit remained on earth. His friends continued on to say that the wolf will follow its killer and avenge itself. The spirit of the Lycan did not have a time limit, as immortality was on its side. All the rest of the wolves followed and honored the blue wolf as if it was a god. Then they told Neil that the best thing they could do was give the wolf a proper burial and forget all about selling the pelt. But Neil knew the price of natural blue wolf pelts and knew he stood to make a high profit. "I'm not going to be a part of this," one of them shouted. "They will still remember." Neil thought all of his friends were a little insane, and as they looked around, all the wolves started coming back. They stood right beside the lifeless blue wolf and howled. So Neil shot one, then another, then another. He didn't even have to try. They were not running away. This was the oddest thing Neil had ever seen. He had never seen so many wolves in one place. He tried to convince his friends to join in, but one by one they all left. "Fine, go then, more profit for me," he shouted. When he was done, he carried the lifeless wolves onto the back of his truck. He had never been so tired and so happy at the same time. He must have shot more than 30 wolves. He couldn't even fit them all, so he had to leave some behind and hope they would still be there when he got back. He drove over to the shop that specialized in buying and selling pelts. Soon enough, Neil got his money. Looking back at the shopkeeper, he said, "I would have brought you more, but I ran out of ammo." And the shopkeeper shook his head and replied, "You're a much braver man than I am. I would have never shot a blue wolf no matter how much the pelts are worth. They are not like the other wolves. They will not forget even if 50 years passes. They still remember, and they will bring their pack with them." Neil was now starting to feel uneasy, but shrugged it off. When he got the rest of his payment, he made his way back to the truck. He could see the sun dimming, and it fell behind the trees. "I must hurry," Neil thought. "If I don't make it back home in time for dinner, Amelia will never let me hear the end of it." A few miles down the road, he felt part of the truck shaking. When he stopped, he could hear something sliding in the back of the truck, but saw nothing. He kept the truck still and listened closely. It sounded like something in the back of his truck was moving. He did not move a muscle, sweat dripping from the corners of his eyes. Neil hardly even breathed as he attempted to focus on what it was. His hands moved to the rail of his gun as he slowly but surely picked it up. He clutched tightly over the handle as he then felt his truck move up and down, as if something just suddenly jumped out of it. Now it sounded like something was under the truck. Neil could not take the suspense any longer, and he pressed his foot on the accelerator hard. He could hear one of the back tires pop as he took off. The truck hurled down the road, but Neil paid no attention. As he got close to his home, he pressed the brakes, but to no avail. The brakes were not working, and he was about to ram into the house. He swerved the truck and leaped out of the vehicle for a few seconds before it slammed into a tree. Neil tossed over the ground with a few cuts and scrapes. He staggered as he got back on his feet. His wife opened the front door in a startle to find out what all the commotion was all about. She raced over to Neil and demanded to know what happened. "Call the police," he said. In a statement of panic, Neil told his wife everything that had happened and tried to make sense of it all. Nightfall was approaching, as Neil got on the phone and told the officer that his truck was sabotaged. He went further on to say that while in the shop to sell his wolf pelts, someone tampered with his brakes and flattened his tires. The officer told him he would be sending someone over in a few hours. Neil demanded to know why it would take so long.
"Well, sir, a standoff and a shootout is still pending,"
the officer explained.
"Now, one officer is down and these men are heavily armed. Your address takes about an hour as it is to reach. You don't seem to be in any current danger right now, sir, and I'm sure it can wait until later on to sort it out. Or you could try walking to the station, but I wouldn't suggest that."
Neil slammed the phone down and looked to his wife. "Police are good for nothing around here. I know how to put a stop to this once and for all. I'll invite my shooting buddies here." As he attempted to call his friends, he could not seem to get in touch with a single one. None of them answered their phones. Out of frustration, Neil threw the phone to the ground and looked back to his wife. "It's just this day, that's all. Everyone acting all strange. It's got me paranoid. But there's nothing to worry about." "If there's nothing to worry about, then why did you have to make up that story to the officer?" Amelia responded back. "You were afraid they would think you were crazy and not show up at all. You know what lurks out there in the darkness, and you know they still remember." Neil just then had a look on his face like he wanted to strike down his wife. But he could hear footsteps outside his home. He looked out the window but saw no one there. He turned on the front and back lights to his house, but did not dare to step out of his home. He locked the doors and windows and moved the furniture around to barricade the entrance. The sound of growls could be heard outside. Now the door to the front entrance started to shake, and the cabinet that was against it fell over. The dishes inside broke to pieces. The glass in the cabinet door scattered, and his wife screamed in fear, "Look what your greed has brought us!" Now the door began to crack. It sounded like whatever was outside was ramming into it. Suddenly, the door swung open. Neil didn't see a thing, but heard the footsteps come inside. Before he had a chance to run, he got a sharp pain in his leg. He tried to pull away, but as he did, his leg tore, and he began to bleed. It pulled and dragged Neil down, the growl sounding like that of a wolf. Amelia watched in horror as it looked as if her husband was being mauled, knowing after it was done she would be next. She got a knife from the kitchen and raced back. However, before she came back, whatever was on her husband leaped off. Neil ran for his life to the bedroom and locked the door. He sat behind the door and leaned against it. His wife, however, was still in the same room as the Lycan, and she was too afraid to make a move. She stayed frozen, and her legs didn't work. She heard it walking. It moved over to the door. Her husband was behind. The knob shook and turned. Then, indentations formed around the knob as it looked like teeth marks, the ones a wolf would make. Then, the noise stopped again, and it appeared that the wolf might have actually left. But now, a loud scratching could be heard from the side of the house. Not only that, but from the window of the room Neil was in. He went to his drawer and pulled out a small pistol with some ammo, pulling the trigger back and waiting nervously. For the first time, Neil experienced a new level of fear, and he wasn't even holding the gun straight. It wouldn't do any good, for he heard the sound but saw nothing. And if he shot the window and missed the wolf, he would be letting it into his home again. Neil's mind raced 100 miles a minute as he knew what it was like now to be hunted. Claw marks etched over the glass as the streaks made their way down. The wolf grew hungrier and more impatient. snarling, pursued as it looked like the window was starting to give way and crack. Just as Neil got up to his feet, the window broke completely. He had just enough time to run out and close the door behind him. This time, he was holding the door on the other end. He could feel the fang marks on the doorknob. "Amelia! Amelia, do something!" he shouted at the top of his lungs. But she didn't utter a word. She just looked outside slowly, and her jaw dropped as she tried to compose herself. She saw wolves everywhere, and they seemed to surround the whole house. It was obvious they were still following their leader. She did not know what else to do. She got on her hands and knees and prayed. But these wolves did not growl at her or show their fangs. They stared at her. They looked back at each other. Finally, one of the wolves stepped back, followed by another wolf. They seemed to make a trail for her that was just wide enough for her to be able to pass through. Neil looked to her and said, "Don't do it! You just can't leave me here to die!" He knew if he tried to stop her, the wolf on the other side would open the door and come after him, and he had no place to run. She looked to him in a very cold gaze, one that he had given her many times before throughout their marriage. "You were warned, and after all these years you never once listened to me or your friends. You made your own bed and tonight you're going to sleep in it." And just like that, she slowly walked out, one foot after the other. As much as he wanted to stop her, he could feel the blue wolf on the other end, trying to get the door open. It took all of his might to keep it closed, and as she left, the wolves slowly began to make their way inside. Neil had no idea what was more painful, to let go of the door and let what's on the other side end his life, or to have the wolves come in, devouring him. Lucky for Amelia, she would not have to see such a sight or know what decision that Neil finally made.